So I'll spend a couple minutes here talking about the tools portal next. So from OpenRTB, we'll move on to the tools portal. And I just want to make sure that everyone is well aware of this resource. This is a resource that Tech Lab provides to the industry. It's free to create an account. You can go in here and really focus on two main areas. We have the Resource Center and we have the Transparency Center. Resource Center, think about that as where you would generally be putting in information about your participation in a given program. And then the Transparency Center is where you can go to look up sort of how everyone else answers questions about the Resource Center. So I say this along the lines of Tech Lab gets a question a lot about who uses what standards. And so I talked about that earlier about our year of adoption and focus on making sure that we have a good understanding of who's using which versions of certain standards. And we get that question all the time. So what we are trying to do here within the Resource Center, you can find something like the self-attestation of specifications. So as a company, you can go into the Resource Center and go to the specification adoption module, and you can tell us what versions you use for your business and what specifications and what versions. And then that information is actually available within the Transparency Center, so that if someone is looking for, I want a partner who uses VAST4, they can actually go to the Transparency Center and look up partners who have implemented VAST4. And so we have that give and take of you can provide the information, and then you can also search to see who else is using that. And I'll also say that the data available in the tools portal in the Transparency Center is always available in two formats. So first, we have the Data Explorer, which are pretty easy to use UIs and tables, where you can search specific domains, or you can search specific specifications, like my example prior. And then we also have a programmatic API. And so that's the only part of the tools portal that is a paid subscription. And that's if you want to get sort of bundles of data on a more frequent basis for analysis or for use in your own platform. And the most common use for that is that we actually have, you can see the data in front of me is the ads.txt data. So we have ads.txt, app ads.txt, and sellers JSON aggregated data for millions of domains that we do provide API access to sort of a full aggregated set of that data at an annual fee. And then last, I wanted to talk a little bit about Advanced TV. And this is what I alluded to earlier. I'm really excited to share with you guys, because as AdOps professionals, you are sort of the ones that I think that this hits the hardest in both what we're asking of the industry and in what the problems that it causes when it's not done. So I do think that your feedback and your engagement in this topic is critical to its success. So I'll start with the fact that for the CTV landscape, everyone just wants to know what is the ad being served and whose ad is it. And it seems like a pretty simple set of questions on the surface. You'd think that you would know what ad is playing, especially as a publisher or maybe as a measurement vendor working with the publisher, but it is actually a lot more complex than those simple questions make it out to be. And why is it important? I mean, it's important because you definitely need to know who, as an advertiser, you want to make sure that it can be reconciled, how many times your ad played if you purchase specific commitments. You, as a publisher, you want to make sure that the user experience is good. So you want to make sure that you're adhering to any frequency caps, that, you know, if you're serving an ad pod or a commercial break, that you don't have maybe competitive ads in the same break. You want to make sure that the ad itself is a fit with the content, that there's no sort of concerns from a brand safety perspective on either side. And then, of course, that reconciliation piece. You want to be able to account for which ads were shown and make sure that that aligns with any commitments that were made previously. And so that's where the Ad Creative ID framework comes in. So this is a focus on defining the use of registered creative IDs that travel with the ad creative through the digital supply chain, actually through every supply chain for video, because we want to really focus on enabling cross-platform measurement and reconciliation. So I will note that, and many of you guys may be familiar, registered creative IDs are really a requirement in linear television. Ads don't go on the air without sort of an understanding of this is the ID, this is the person, the advertiser, this is the person paying for it if it's not the advertiser. Those are sort of table stakes. With the explosion of CTV and streaming, we haven't had the same discipline. And digital video on the web certainly doesn't have the same requirements. But the investments are still substantial. It's, you know, especially CTV streaming inventory, like those are investment dollars that you want to track, that you want to make sure you're getting the ROI that you expect. And so to do that, the easiest path forward is to make sure that we include that registered ID with creative. So what is the framework? It really has 4 parts that I'll highlight here. First is registries. Registries are an entity that you would go to receive a registered ID for all video creative. Standardize the use. So this is a way to make sure that once you have that registered ID, there are standardized places and locations within protocols, within advertising systems to incorporate that ID and make sure that it travels with the creative. Because what we noted was that sometimes the creative ID does exist, but maybe you can't put it into your buyer ad server. Or maybe you can't put it into your DSP. Or maybe it doesn't go in the VAST. There's not a field in the VAST version that you use. Those are all things that we seek to try and standardize with this framework. Third is a directory. And so this directory is really to help show all of the participating registries globally. Because at the end of the day, the registries are entities that tend to live in each market. So in the US, we have the organization AdID. There are, you know, I've been learning more about this over the last year, and there seem to be an organization almost per country, per region, that really owns this ad registration concept that's currently used in linear. And they all have been working through efforts to sort of make sure that that same registration process applies to digital. And this framework really seeks to support that, to work with them in those efforts, because we think that it helps solve a lot of problems in the digital space as well. And so the directory would be hosted within the Tech Lab Tools portal, and that is just a way to see all of the global registries that participate in this framework, so that you kind of have a one-stop shop to go to see all of those participating registration authorities. And then the last is validation. So why is it important to have a single creative ID? It's important because you want to be able to have a single source of truth on what metadata is associated with that singular ID. So if I have ID 1234 and I know that it was issued by registry@id.org, I can go to adid.org for validation. And so what that validation looks like is it would be some way for you as a supply chain participant to query AdID in some way with that identifier and receive a standard set of metadata about the creative. You could think of this as things like know the advertiser name, know the product name or the brand name, and some basic pieces of information about the video itself. And so how does this work? This just illustrates that workflow. So the buyer, advertiser, there's sort of a lot of parties here as far as the creative agency, media agency, advertiser. We definitely understand that there are different workflows for different teams. And you know, those workflows can be the same, and we're not asking to have those overhauled. We're just saying that whoever owns the actual creative generation also owns registering that ID and making sure that it has one of those. And then once that ID is registered, that the ID itself is included. I provided an example of one of the areas we standardized here, the VAST example, which has the universal ad ID attribute, where you can include both the ad ID or the ID of the registry and the ID, like the creative ID itself. And then this shows how, basically all of the supply chain participants that might need this information, whether those are the various ad tech participants in SSP or DSP, measurement providers, verification providers, programmers, they can all check the directory to see if if a specific registry is participating. And then they can have confidence basically to query those registries. This is an example of doing that validation. So they provide the ID to the registry provides back the information like the advertiser and product name. And I just want to share that this is, this is certainly something that is a problem across the industry and something that a lot of our member companies have asked us to try and tackle. And so these are the companies that participate in Tech Lab's Advanced TV Commit Group, which is the working group where a lot of these efforts have come from. And so you can see a lot of the big players in digital video and streaming are really focused on making sure that we have a solution to identifying the creative. And so this is the ask for how you can help. So this gives just an idea of, as advertisers and agencies, we're asking for your feedback. We're asking for to evaluate your workflows and ensure that there's a path to standardize the usage of a registered ID and inclusion of that identifier in things like the VAST tag. And then for technology platforms, we want your help making sure that it's as easy as possible to include that universal ad ID sort of anywhere within the campaign setup so that there's multiple places that can be entered. And then registries, we already have a few participating in the commit group and many globally that we've been working with to get themselves added to the directory. And the goal there is to really make sure that they have a standardized means to issue that validation information. And that's it. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And definitely reach out if you have any questions or any follow-ups.